Hello, hello, everyone. It is 6 o'clock p.m. Florida, New York time on the dot, and we are getting ready to start our webinar discussion on what is foot reading, or as some of my clients would lovingly, however, ignorantly say, what the hell is this foot reading thing, Sam? I really just have no idea what you're talking about. So as everybody gets acclimated, you can see me kind of looking back and forth. I'm looking at the chat on this screen and I'm looking at the webinar on this screen. So make sure that when you are in the chat, you are introducing yourself and letting me know where you are watching from, because that really lights my fire in terms of chatting with people all over the world. Like our previous webinars, I think it's really cool how we get people from Ireland and Italy and Africa. It's just so fascinating to see where the power of foot reading takes us. So thank you all for jumping onto the chat and letting me know that you are here and that you are ready to learn about some foot reading. Sandy just jumped on from Canada. Thanks, Sandy. We have Lenka, who is watching from Slovakia. Props to my Slovakian people. And let's talk about foot reading. So if you are on this webinar or you're watching the replay of this webinar through our online school, I'm designing this content to promote our online foot reading certification course that will be coming out over the next couple months. But this webinar is kind of a preview of that to help you understand what foot reading is, how it works, allowing you to delve into the basic concepts so that you can educate friends, family, clients on the kind of basic methodology of foot reading before you make the choice of whether or not you want to kind of sap it all in and take it all in and learn officially how to become a foot reading expert like me. So without further ado, let me share my screen and we will get into the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So what is foot reading? I'm so happy to bring you this topic because literally I could talk about this for hours, no joke, sometimes to the bane of my clients and students, but you all are willingly here, present, learning and listening. So let's delve into it. And as I'm talking, make sure that you're sending your questions into the chat and I'll answer them as we go. But also if you're watching the replay, make sure to use the comment section. I will respond to them as soon as I am able, and we can start the dialogue and keep it going. Okay, so first and foremost, we're going to talk about foot reading's history. And some of you maybe did not know that foot reading actually has a history. So we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about my story and how I arrived at this beautiful modality that is foot reading, and give you a little bit of background. And then we're going to talk about the definition of foot reading. So in my book, Foot Reading, a Reflexology Primer on Foot Assessment, I give a very pointed definition as far as what foot reading is and how it is done and the concepts that make it up as a modality. So we're really going to take that definition and dissect it piece by piece using the literal interpretation of the word anatomy, meaning to cut or separate, and break down this idea of reading the feet. Then we're going to talk about what foot readers know. And that's basically going to give you an idea as far as what content needs to be absorbed and understood in order to read feet accurately, but also when you are kind of studying this craft, what things should you check off your internal knowing bucket list to make sure that you have the ins and outs of this craft. And also you can use some of these aspects to explain how foot reading works with friends and family to really help them understand, especially from a client dynamic, like what all is involved with looking at the feet and telling somebody basically what they're thinking, feeling, and physically experiencing on a moment-to-moment basis. Certification, we're going to talk about that. Like, is this a certifiable modality? That's a very interesting conversation, especially since we have an international audience here in the chat. It'll be fascinating to discuss that and share some of the budding realizations in the foot reading space. Bet you didn't know that there was a foot reading space, but now you do. Okay, and then we're going to dissect how to use foot reading. So some options as far as who makes a good foot reader, when is foot reading appropriate, maybe when it's not appropriate as well, some ethical discussions and considerations there. And we're going to drill down how to use foot reading in a practical stance in order to make sure that you know how to effectively leverage the content of this modality. Okay, and we're going to open it up to a live Q&A. So if you have questions, in addition to the ones throughout the chat, for those of you who are on the webinar live, you can always jump on, always ask me questions, and I will answer them as best as I possibly can. The last webinar we did, it was really fast and we were going back and forth and people were pitching questions of all sorts of different topics relating to business and websites and ethical considerations and documentation and reflexology and all of these different things. So I really look forward to that opportunity to live chat with you all because it's going to be super, super fun and amazing and hopefully answer some of those questions. Okay. So here's my story, and my story is intimately connected with foot reading's story for a couple different reasons. But first and foremost, as the presenter of this webinar, I wanted to kind of introduce what qualifies me to talk about this idea of foot reading, and then also explain how I fit into the larger picture. Okay, so my initial reflexology training was less than stellar, and I personally did not feel like I got exactly what I needed from that curriculum. And so becoming a hands-on reflexologist and working with the feet from a service-oriented perspective for the past 6 years or so, it really made me delve into the trenches, discover what worked, discover what didn't, and then ask myself those deeper questions as far as, hey, does reflexology actually work? Is there another level? And in fact, there was. It's called foot reading, which is what I'm here talking about now. So that initial kind of stint in reflexology, which is a modality that I still practice today, is intimately connected with the craft, and it should be studied for any serious foot reader because it does give us that physical side to the equation as well. So from my hands-on reflexology background, I started to get really creepily good at assessment of the feet, hence the name, for those of you that are watching, the Foot Whisperer. That was actually a joke that my clients gave to me. The name was basically handed to me on a silver platter by a couple clients at the same time who came up with the same kind of weird nickname for me. And it was very much an internal joke. So they started calling me the Foot Whisperer, and the name and the joke became the brand. And that is how the Foot Whisperer Reflexology Institute was born. And now we are actually a physical institute in Tampa, Florida that specializes not only in teaching people hands-on reflexology, but also specializes in the modality of foot reading or foot assessment. So that's kind of part of my journey. We're going to talk about these two people a lot during the webinar because they are so influential in foot reading's history. I found Jane Sheehan first and then was introduced to Imre Somoji. These are the two pioneers of foot reading that we're really going to delve in depth with because they give us our first couple acts as far as how foot reading developed, what it is, and the larger context of kind of how it surfaced as an independent modality. Okay. Testing and validation is one of the things that I pride myself on as a foot reader, something that I needed to make sure, also because I have that physical therapy background. For those of you that have followed me on social media or maybe have taken courses from me, I do have a very medical and scientific edge to me. And so testing foot reading and validating the principles that I'm about to talk about and share with you was a big part of my story, and I think should be a big part of yours. So everything that we're going to talk about today and all of the content that I put out on social media platforms needs to be tested and validated. And that's part of the reason why this webinar is so important, is to make sure that you understand what foot reading is and that you can take it to your clientele, your friends, your family, and implement these principles, get the real-time feedback, and then validate for yourselves whether or not this is a modality that you would like to pursue. I started teaching writing fanatically, still do on the subject, and creating webinars like this one and courses like the one that will be airing, our online certification course for foot reading, over the next couple months. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell, and let's drill down each of those individual points so that you get an idea of who's talking to you, and we'll kind of explain the history of foot reading and the different aspects of foot reading all at the same time. And remember, keep posting your questions in the chat. I will get to them and the comments below for those of you who are watching the recorded version, and we will have a grand old time. So without further ado, so let's talk about Jane Sheehan. Jane Sheehan is this lovely, lovely, kind, sweet lady in the UK, and she was also my first mentor. She doesn't really know it because we corresponded a lot via email, and I haven't received the official work that she's read my work or the book, but I have connected with her on several occasions, and she is just such a pleasant force of nature to interact with. And she wrote the book, Let's Read Our Feet, the Foot Reading Guide. And this was the book that I personally stumbled across on my search for greater meaning within the foot reading dynamic. So I had originally, funny story, popped across another foot reading book that was smaller, a little bit sketchier, not as well written. And what I found when I started researching foot reading in general was that the first book that I picked up was actually almost literally a plagiarized version of Jane's book, using some of the exact same examples, exact same stories and principles. And Jane's book is kind of the OG, the original foot reading text that I personally started to fall down the rabbit hole with. Her work is so pioneering, and that's really how I developed my interest, is through her content. And here's an interesting story. So when I was first kind of, like I said, falling down the rabbit hole of this idea of foot reading, kind of as a novice reflexologist, a couple years into my studies and hands-on practical application, I discovered Jane's work, and she actually has a foot reading online course, something really simple, something really easy, definitely not advanced at all, but just to kind of support the content that's in her book, and immediately kind of being addicted to this content and wanting so much more, I jumped onto her online course. And funny thing was, I don't know how I did it, but I found a back door into her online course, or I must have clicked a button that was malfunctioning, and it took me right into the online course without me actually having to pay for anything. And it was like a $175 online course. Like it was not a cheapo online course, and I just stumbled across the content. And so I had actually sent her an email saying, look, I think something's broken. I realized about halfway through the course that this is a paid course, not a free course, and I'm not sure how I got into it, but I just wanted to let you know so that you can fix it because I respect your work so much. And she sent me back this email. She was totally shocked. She said, thank you so much for your honesty, and I'm just going to give you the course anyway, because you were honest, and if you would like, you can pay for it, but otherwise, please, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I will give it to you for free. And of course I paid for the course because it was such valuable content and she was so nice about it. But that was our first interaction. And then she also did an interview with me in her Pampering Times newsletter, which is fabulous. Comes with an astrology report and everything. But she is over in the UK, so it was fascinating to hear how reflexology and foot reading differs over on the other side of the pond, as opposed to here over in the US and specifically in Florida that has super high regulatory standards. So Jane and I have gone back and forth on multiple occasions talking about that difference, and her book is still the seminal text that I refer to and recommend to my students as far as foot reading goes. So if you have not picked up that book, it's a little bit pricey for a physical copy, but the online version is about 20 bucks. And it's, especially if you have an e-reading format that lets you zoom into the pictures, it's fascinating because her pictures are really worth 1,000 words in that book. Okay, so first we have Jane, but Jane learned from this guy, Imri. So Imri Samoji, G-Y-I, that is quite the name to pronounce. He is the founder of Reading Toes, and he wrote this book, Reading Toes, and he is officially my mentor's mentor. So Jane found Imri, and Imri's book, Reading Toes, was really the first one on the market that I have seen in terms of a classic foot reading text. But the interesting thing is, he only reads toes in that book, and he only talks about the toes, which is fascinating. So if you want a book just on toes, not necessarily foot reading, but toe reading, this is the book to go for. Now, the interesting part about Imre's work as well is that he only talks about the mental emotional aspect of the work. So he's only relaying the 5 toes on each foot to internal stressors. And so Jane, learning from him, did the exact same thing, except she extended her map to the entire foot. Okay, so reading toes came before Jane and her book, Let's Read Our Feet, but the two are very similar. And so you'll see a lot of the toe nuances in Jane's book, but Imre was the one who really inspired Jane to take it further. And then she developed her own unique content, including the entire foot. What's also very interesting is Jane talks about this a lot in her book. She talks about how she tried to find other foot readers and people who are also studying the feet to learn both the physical and the internal aspects of somebody's life and reading that through the feet. And Jane found maybe 3 or 4 different people that she cites, and they were all self-taught independent learners. So there is no foot reading lineage yet, which is why I think it's so important to really throw these two fundamental characters out there in terms of Imre teaching Jane, who then has taught me. We'll talk about me in a second. But this content is so fledgling and so fringe. Yes, the feet and their significance have popped up in every culture throughout the world. There's a lot of kind of folk remedy-ish, hedgy stuff that you can read. You know, the feet are given special significance, especially if you've seen that that drawing of the feet of Vishnu, which is on the cover of Christine Eisel's book, Reflexology, Art, Science, History. Like, the feet are always revered in some way, shape, or form. And Jane talks about some of the folk traditions in her book, but nobody has really nailed down this subject and created a lineage of foot reading. So these two people are who I learned from and who I base my content on. And the stuff that I'm going to be talking about is based off them, but then I put my own twist on it. So let me kind of share that with you now. So I started with the IIR, which is the International Institute of Reflexology. Some of you may be familiar with them. My reflexology journey is what started my foot reading journey. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that before we jump into the foot reading content. So the International Institute is very protective of their stuff and their logos. They are the original lineage bearers underneath Eunice Ingham, who is affectionately known as the mother of reflexology, especially over in the US. However, there are 2 books that I just wanted to throw up there for you if you wanted additional resources. Better Health with Foot Reflexology, which is Dwight Byers' book, very visual, very excellent if you wanted to have a book to just quick reference. But they also talk about areas of emphasis, which I'm not a fan of. Eunice's book is a little bit, again, to use that word, seminal. She talks a lot about her original experiences with reflexology and how to interpret the feet, and specifically the areas of tenderness in the feet and what they mean from a reflexology standpoint, but more as a manual therapy. And that's really where I started. I started as a hands-on reflexologist, and I was palpating the reflexes and I was feeling things that were happening. But the funny thing is that the International Institute, although they are wonderful at teaching technique, they are not good at teaching assessment. And that was what fascinated me, was that as I was doing the hands-on reflexology technique, I was feeling stuff, not just crunchy stuff, but puffy stuff and dry stuff and empty stuff and rigid stuff, all within the textures of the feet. And I started to ask myself this question, like, it must mean something. Like, something's going on here. Tell me about it. But unfortunately, they didn't have the answers. And so my journey continued. I then went to the highest of high, the mountain of reflexology in the US, which is the American Reflexology Certification Board, or the ARCB, as it's affectionately known. And I got dual nationally certified in feet and hands because they don't have ears and face. Otherwise, I would have taken those 2, because I'm just an overachiever like that. But even with the ARCB, the American Reflexology Certification Board, they don't talk about assessment. On their noting forms, they talk about things like puffiness or callousing or injury, but there's nothing in their material that talks about assessing the physical and internal states of a person based on what you feel during a reflexology session, which I was also terribly disappointed with. So I had no choice but to really hunker down and create my own content. So enter me. This is me. My name is Sam Bellier, and I bring foot reading and reflexology together in my book, Foot Reading, a Reflexology Primer on Foot Assessment. So what's super important about the work that I'm going to talk about today, and what's important for you to understand about the context going forward, is I fuse reflexology and foot reading. So Imri's work on reading toes, Jane's work on reading feet, and then the International Institute of Reflexology and the American Reflexology Certification Board. Everything that I have learned, I have cooked in a big old pot and let sit over the past, 5 to, gosh, it's going on 9 years now that I've been practicing. And I created my own system of foot reading, which I'm going to outline for you today and hopefully give you some food for thought as far as never looking at the feet the same way again, because that's really the essence of my work, is to share with people the significance of what the feet can say. And I detail it all in the book, and we're going to go over some of the core concepts in this presentation. So let's now crack the definition of foot reading. So let me kind of backtrack. So in theology, when we study a theory, a definition is so important. Calling something by its name and giving it meaning is so important. And when we think of foot reading as such a fledgling modality and not really having such a large history, I wanted to give an official definition to foot reading as the following. Foot reading is the art and science of identifying visual, textural, and walking patterns, also known as markers, that relate to a person's current and past physical, mental, and emotional tension. Okay? There are a couple key things that you need to understand about this definition. We are talking about foot reading as a modality that is both an art and a science. So when my clients come to me and my students come to me, and they're like, wow, how in the heck did you figure out that that little bump on my foot meant that I was having shoulder problems? Well, that is the science of it. Yes? So we study as foot readers the physical reflexes as well as the mental emotional significance of markers in those reflexes, and we're able to crack the code on what would be the science of interpreting the meanings of the feet. And this science is identifying the visual, textural, and walking patterns known as markers that relate to a person's current and past physical, mental, emotional tension, blah, 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 the definition, yes? But there is an art to this process. And this is what is missing currently in this concept of foot reading or reading feet. Because yes, we have a science, we have a format. In Imri's book, in Jane's book, and in my book, we all talk about this idea that there is a structured map. And for those of you that have studied reflexology, there is a structured map of this area represents the stomach, this area represents the head and neck, this area represents the pancreas. It is very scientifically based in terms of this is where that corresponding area is referenced on the feet. Same thing with the mental emotional markers. We're talking about where the thoughts are located, where the feelings are located, where the sense of career is located, the family and relationships, the sense of security. All of those things are mapped in the feet in a very scientific way. But what happens when somebody gets really good at reading feet, and when you study something for long enough, there's that master threshold that starts to get crossed, and the science starts to become an art. It's just like any other craft that you studied. You practice it enough and you start to get good, and then magic starts to happen. And that is the art. So the foot readers are really the people that study the science and turn it into an art of foot reading. And this is something that, especially from a reflexology standpoint, in the lore of reflexology, I remember kind of growing up in the field and hearing from my clients that, hey, they went and got this reflexology a really long time ago, and the person working on their feet told them that they had a hysterectomy, and they had had a hysterectomy, and it was mind blowing to see how somebody could see that, in the feet. And now I think of that as something just totally second nature. I'm like, of course you had a knee replacement. I see it in the reflexes, but that art comes from studying thousands of feet and going over this same mapping content tens of hundreds of thousands of times. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a reflexology map because I've lost count. I've taken so many classes. I've taught so many classes. I've done so many sessions and looked at my reflexology map as I was doing them. Same thing with the foot reading. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back and read all of those books that led me to where I am today. So really understanding both foot reading as a science, but also an art that can be practiced and get good at is very, very important. So let's talk about this idea of visual, textural, and walking patterns known as markers. So we're identifying these concepts visually, texturally, and through gait, known as walking patterns. So when clients come in to see me for a consultation, yes, which may be tied to a hands-on reflexology session, but maybe not. I have clients that come in and I am literally just looking at the feet. I am visually assessing. So that visual aspect of foot reading is very prominent. I share on my blog this one story of a networking partner. I think it's called "Never Wear Flip-Flops Around a Reflexologist" is the title of the blog post that I did. And I walked into the room. I was chatting with one of my networking partners, looked down, they were wearing flip-flops, big old bunion that I had never seen before on the left side. And I immediately called it up as bottled up emotional stress and heart problems. And they were flabbergasted. They had never really gotten a taste of what I did for a living. And so it really blew their mind. And so that visual aspect of actually looking at the feet and interpreting using the art and science of visual identification is very important to the foot reader. But for those of you who have the hands-on component of reflexology or have ever gotten a foot massage or given a foot massage and you felt kind of the crunchiness, the puffiness, the heat, the cold, all of those different textural feelings, those are all very important to the foot reader as well. So when I'm doing a hands-on reflexology session, as I'm walking the physical reflexes and I'm what's known as palpating or touching with purpose and integrity, as I'm feeling those areas, I'm actually identifying with my touch receptors different markers and different kind of aspects of the person physically and mentally and emotionally that I will then relay at the end of the session as part of the reading or the consultation. And then finally, this is the one that throws people for a loop, but is so fun. If you've never watched people walk before, it is an activity that I could literally do all day. Walking patterns are a huge part of foot reading and something that I cover extensively with my students here at the Institute. For those who are enrolled in the live reflexology certification program, which is 300 hours, we meet one weekend a month for 12 months. Like, it's really extensive. During our weekend, when we cover the nervous system, we talk about body language, and walking patterns are part of that body language. So what we do is we actually go to the mall, and at the mall, we sit around inconspicuously, like if you can imagine like 8 to 10 or 8 to 12, depending on the group, like foot readers, all with like black sunglasses, sipping on Starbucks Frappuccinos, like watching people walking, gossiping about their walk. That is exactly what we look like. Not really, but that's kind of the idea, is we're sitting around comparing notes, talking about how people walk in groups, how they walk independently, identifying postural compensations that may be happening, identifying different aspects of their personality through their gait or their walk, which all creates a third level of this identification of the foot reading markers. And so a marker is this word that I throw around, and it basically means anything out of the norm that gives us kind of like a clue as far as things to relay or aspects of the foot that are talking to us. That is kind of like a marker, like X marks the spot. So patches of dryness would be markers, curled toes would be markers, but also textural things like I had mentioned, heat and coolness are markers, but then walking patterns, like people who walk with one foot splayed out to the side while the other is straight forward, people who walk more forward on the balls of their feet, people who walk backwards towards the heels, pigeon-toed, all of those are considered markers as well. And the bottom line is it relates to a person's current and past levels of physical, mental, and emotional tension. So what I mean by current and past, this is another misnomer in terms of foot reading. When I say foot reading, or when my clients come in or Skype me in for a foot reading consultation, they're oftentimes expecting like this gypsy sitting at a table, looking into their foot and telling them about how they're going to have 3 children. And that is definitely not what a foot reading is all about, or a foot reading consultation is all about. Instead, we are using those visual, textural, and walking patterns to relate a person's current and past levels of physical, mental, and emotional tension, i.e., we are looking into the body and what the body is holding, like past trauma, like issues in the tissues, but also what's happening currently in their life, what is currently running through the nervous system that may be causing the toes to bend, causing the toes or the feet to become dehydrated or dry or callous, but we're not looking into the future because the future hasn't happened yet. It's not occurring in the nervous system at that moment. So we're only concerned with what has happened and is still being held on to by the physical tissues, and what is currently happening, and what is kind of in the body is like in the throes of certain types of stress. And those are the types of things that we assess during a foot reading, is current and past physical and mental emotional stress. So things that I might pick up during an assessment with clientele would be previous knee injuries. I have clients that come in who are on the athletic circuit, and they'll be currently experiencing like calf spasms really, really bad. And so I'll be able to identify an old hamstring injury that was never really fully healed, which is causing the calves to spasm at that moment, just by identifying the visual and textural markers. Same thing with walking patterns. If we wanted to think of that example of maybe the left foot is splayed wide open, but the right foot is kind of military straight. The left foot being splayed open indicates that somebody has recently become very carefree, very open to new experiences, versus in the past, that right foot, they are laser focused and maybe were very determined to get a goal done, which they have accomplished. And the body is now choosing to release those patterns of kind of straight and narrow stuckness. So current and past, very significant with foot reading, because it gives us an internal timeline as far as how somebody is processing events that have happened and are happening in their life. But then here's the kicker that really intrigues people who are new to this idea of foot reading, is that from a reflexology standpoint, we're looking at the physical reflexes and how each area of the foot represents a very specific area of the body. And by using our ability to assess the visual, textural, and walking patterns, we can see where physical stress is bottling up. But then there's this idea from a foot reading standpoint, especially when we think of Jane Sheehan's work and Imri's work, that the mental and emotional tension of a person is also held within the feet and can be mapped and can be identified and can reveal somebody's current and past level of mental and emotional tension. And that aspect of the foot reading really blows people's minds, because, reflexology as advertised can be pretty straightforward. Like, somebody has irritable bowel issues, I see a lot of heat, puffiness, swelling in the lower GI reflexes, and I call it as irritable bowel. And they're like, wow, that's exactly what I expected from a reflexologist who knows what they're doing. But then when I talk about how that same horizontal zone 4 represents family and relationship stress, do you feel like the people in your top 5, the people who are closest to you at this moment, are heavily influencing those digestive stresses to appear more so than, say, the actual physical tissues of the digestive tract in the colon kind of falling apart? That way we enter into a deeper conversation as far as what's causing the stress to manifest. And that is what blows people's minds in terms of foot reading. And that is why a more consultative approach is so important, is because it's not only educating somebody based on reflexology theory, but coaching somebody on this idea that, hey, the physical tissues are also a representation of the internal state of an individual. The two are always connected, never separated. End of story. Foot reading is awesome. That's the concept that we're talking about here. As we're going, we're done with the definition of foot reading, but keep posting your questions in the chat and let me know if you're kind of following along thus far, because this is a lot to take in. So make sure that, let me know that you're still kind of with me here. Okay, so now let's talk about what a foot reader knows that maybe the average person does not, and kind of some basic theory in terms of how we can understand foot reading maybe just a little bit better and crack the code on that process. Okay, so first and foremost, horizontal zones. So horizontal zones are basically the map. Do you like my little guy with my little fig leaf right there? Basically, from a reflexology and foot reading standpoint, the foot reader who is trained divides the body and the feet into 5 horizontal zones, which map both on a foot level and a body level where the reflexes are held. So the toes represent the head and neck, the ball of the foot represents the chest, shoulder, arm area, the what would be the distal arch, or the arch that is furthest from the body, represents the upper GI area. The proximal arch, or the arch that is closer to the body, represents the lower GI, pelvic, reproductive, urinary area, and then the heel represents everything lower body. This is fascinating to people that have never seen kind of a zone map before. Oftentimes in reflexology, you see this map with all of these color-coded little squiggly lines and shapes, and it can be very intimidating for somebody who hasn't seen this idea that the body can be mapped on the feet before. So I like to start with this idea of horizontal zones because it's a cut and dry way to say, hey, these are the 5 major sections of the body, which are subsequently mapped on the 5 major sections of the feet. But what is interesting is that these same horizontal zones not only represent physical reflexes, but also represent internal stressors, okay? So horizontal zone 1, in addition to representing the head and neck, also represents somebody's thoughts and opinions. Horizontal zone 2, representing chest, shoulder, heart area, represents the internal heart, the state of somebody's emotional body. Then we go into horizontal zone 3, which represents upper GI, but then also represents somebody's sense of career and actions. Horizontal zone 4, lower GI, represents somebody's family and relationship stressors. Then we go into horizontal zone 5 in the heel area, which represents somebody's sense of security and how they're moving forward. So we can take the physical meaning and also interpret it mentally and emotionally using the exact same map. And that's what makes a foot reader dangerous, is because we can not only see inside the physical tissues, but also the thoughts and feelings of a person as well, and map those from a present and past standpoint. The art and science of foot reading at its finest. Okay, now I'm about to blow your mind even more. So there's this concept of vertical zones. So in addition to horizontal zones, we have this concept of vertical zones. When a marker, when one of those visual, textural, or walking patterns, oh, Erica's on, yay! And then back to vertical zone, sorry, got distracted. When a marker is on point with a certain toe, when it is in line with a vertical zone, that also gives us a secondary flavor to the meaning of the marker. So horizontal zones give us a map of the body, but then vertical zones tell us what system is influencing the marker to occur. From a physical standpoint, foot readers say that anything in line with the big toe, vertical zone 1, represents the influence of the headspace, but also the internal headspace, that influence of horizontal zone 1. So we're talking about the influence of thoughts and opinions here as well. Any marker that's in line with the second toe represents the influence of the chest area, but also the influence of emotions. So when I'm seeing dry patches, puffy areas, heat, or pain in line with the second toe, I automatically know that it's an emotionally influenced symptom. Then we talk about markers in line with the third toe, the third vertical zone, which give us a sense that the upper digestive system is starting to play mischievous little tricks, but also that somebody's internal sense of career and actions is influencing that stressor to manifest physically. Anything in line with the fourth toe gives us this idea that family and relationships are involved, but also that the physical reflexes of the lower GI, reproductive, and urinary systems are starting to wreak havoc on the other kind of body systems, and they're not really playing too nice together. But then everything in line with the fifth toe represents that influence of horizontal zone 5. So we're talking about markers in line with the fifth toe as having extra meanings of influencing somebody's sense of security and how they're moving forward, but also how the lower body may be playing tricks on other systems. So we have this concept of horizontal zones, which give us the actual map according to the body, and the internal association of where things are housed physically on the feet and internally on the feet. And then we have this idea of vertical zones on top of it, giving us a perfect grid to take any foot problem that you have and to give it physical and mental emotional significance. And that is the magic. That is also what makes foot readers super dangerous, is we have back to that idea of foot reading being a science, that idea that everything is mappable, everything has meaning in the feet. And that is what gives foot reading its power, is that ability to see the person inside and out through the lens of the extremity of the feet. Okay, moving on to this idea that I talk a lot about in my posts. Some of you who have followed me on Instagram and Facebook have heard me talk about markers as being air markers or earth markers or water markers or fire markers. And this is a concept that we call elements of a symptom. So in all assessment kind of modalities, so I don't care whether you're traditional Chinese medicine based, or whether you're Western based, or whether you're energy medicine based, like however you want to classify yourself, there are elemental forces or basic kind of movement systems that can be classified very easily in terms of the 4 elements. So we're talking about heat, air, kind of wind, emptiness, over circulation, and then water, fluid, anything emotionally based, and earth, anything solid, rigidity, or growth based. These 4 elements are the quintessential kind of vocabulary of the foot reader. So when my students are starting to describe what they're finding from a foot reading perspective, they're using the zones. They're saying maybe there is a horizontal zone 2, vertical zone 3 issue, but that marker is a fire marker, meaning that it has either pain, spasm, heat, or redness associated with it. And so that would then be decoded as a emotional pain or over excitement that is being influenced by career and actions, or it could be interpreted physically as maybe a spasmodic point in the chest and shoulder area that's being influenced by the upper digestive system on that side. That's a lot. There will not be a quiz, so don't worry about it. But when we talk about elements of a symptom, we're using the body's language of heat, of emptiness and dryness, of fluid and of rigidity to describe what we're finding in the feet and give kind of a dumbed down context, which sounds really bad. But when you have no anatomical experience, or you're not in the medical field, or maybe you've never been exposed to reflexology or foot reading theory, it can be really intimidating for me to rattle off a bunch of markers and zones and using words that you're not familiar with. So we use the elements of a symptom to really show and tell what's happening in the body and give you a simple way to understand, hey, when there's a fire marker in the area, that means that you're prone to inflammation in that spot, that you're prone to excessive heat or pain. If there's an air marker in that area, you're going to see corresponding areas of dryness in the feet. You're going to see weakness. You're going to see fatigue. If you're finding a water marker in the feet, then you're going to find fluid buildup, fluid retention, lots of overly emotional tendencies in that area from an internal standpoint. All of those things very significant, as well as physical fluid backup and the reflexes. And then if we have an earth marker like a callousing or a bunion, you know, also part of that growth factor, we're talking about rigidity, we're talking about stuckness, we're talking about density and hardness in the physical and internal aspects of those tissues. So that's what elements of a symptom are about, and very, very important for foot readers to understand this. And not only that, but for clients to understand this. We're trying to make this idea accessible. So using the elements of a symptom is something that I encourage my students, especially in the book, to really use on a daily basis. Okay, so the last part is really just this idea of humanly possible. You have no idea how many feet I have seen. They are everywhere. I think about them all the time because foot readers look at feet. That's what they do. I personally am a reflexologist by trade. I see people's feet day in, day out, which makes me uniquely qualified in order to interpret them. However, the quintessential skill of a foot reader is to what I tell my students to do in terms of building your Rolodex. So a foot reader, somebody who reads feet for a living, either financially, just for fun, maybe friends and family, or is tied to the reflexology profession in terms of assessing the feet, has seen hundreds, if not thousands, of feet. And that is what makes all of this information stick. Because it's not like, hey, I'm a foot reader. I took this online course and now I can read feet for a living. No, foot readers are made, they are not born. And so if you are interested in foot reading, the first thing, the very first thing that I recommend you do is Google feet. And you will see some crazy, somewhat gross pictures of feet. And that is totally okay because you need to be desensitized at this point because you're a newbie. So it's kind of like a hazing ritual. But at the same point, you don't have at the very beginning your Rolodex of what different feet look like. And especially when I teach a hands-on reflexology workshop or a foot reading workshop, the first thing that the students will say is, well, don't all feet look the same? Like, aren't all feet universally similar? Like, how many variations could there be in terms of 10 toes, an arch, and a heel, and a ball of the foot thrown in there somewhere? Most people don't even know where the ball of the foot is. But as you start to develop your Rolodex of feet, as you start to take foot reading seriously as a modality, you need to start understanding. Like, just to give you an idea, there are two pictures of feet here that have a larger separation in between the big toe and the second toe. This is the mark of the overthinker. Somebody with this type of foot marker will have a very vast internal mental world. They will have increased mental stress, but also they will have a very hard time rationalizing their emotions because they've separated their heart from their head effectively from a foot reading standpoint. Also, they're prone to neck issues which radiate down into the shoulders. Okay, so all of this idea of looking at various feet, seeing long toes, short toes, high arches, low arches, collapsed ankles, proper ankles, weird toenails, high arches, low arches, callousing, weird patterns of color and skin conditions, all of that is super, super significant in the art and science of foot reading. So if there is something that a foot reader has done, it's looked at a lot of feet. And that is kind of one of the quintessential parts of what is foot reading, or what makes a foot reader is somebody who has literally devoted lots and lots of time to see how different feet relate to physical and mental emotional stress patterns. Okay, foot reading reports. So some of you may have jumped on for the last webinar that I did, which was generating a foot reading report. If you did not see that webinar, you can purchase a replay over at the online school, which I will throw up in a couple different places, in addition to the foot reading and reflexology online community group on Facebook. But the foot reading report is something that I personally think that all foot readers should be able to do, even if it's just in the form of social media posts. This idea that you can take a foot, circle a marker, and interpret it on the spot, and really give a physical as well as visual validation to the craft, the art, the science that is foot reading, that I think is a very important point. So if you wanted to check out my website, I have how to generate a foot reading report is one of the blog posts that I recently did in prep for that webinar. All this idea that, hey, the feet are significant, and let me show you how. Okay, consultations, development, knowledge, learning, training, coaching. I love this picture. Consultations are a huge part of my practice. I used to be just a hands-on reflexologist. Now, as people start to get to know me as a foot reader or a foot reading coach, I have so many more consultation appointments than I do reflexology appointments. Probably one of the coolest consultations that I did was being Skyped in overseas to one of my first clientele. They basically said, hey, I've been following you on social media. Would you mind if I Skyped you in at like 7 o'clock in the evening my time, which would be about 3 o'clock in the afternoon your time? And if I paid you for your time, would you take a look at my feet and tell me what the hell is happening? Because something's going on and I'm not sure what. That consultative approach is something that foot reading is blessed to do. So perfect. Whether it's, friends and family giving you pictures of their feet, or random people on the interwebs sending you pictures of your feet that you can then analyze, or if it's a formal paid consultation in terms of a coaching service, both are relevant to this art and science of foot reading, because without the ability to actually look at the feet and to tell somebody, hey, these are the markers that I see, but also this is how you can fix it. This is how you can take your life to the next level based on what I'm seeing as far as stress patterns in the feet. That is how we take this modality and make it practically applicable. Because it's one thing to pick out somebody's flaws, to say, hey, this is a marker for a shoulder issue. This is a marker for migraines. This is a marker for reproductive issues. But it's another thing entirely to let somebody know that they can turn their life around in a very pointed and strategic way just by listening to the messages that are present within the feet and acting in alliance with the body, as opposed to kind of putting earmuffs on that kind of inner dialogue, which a lot of people tend to do nowadays. So foot reading as a consultative approach really allows you to target a client's weakest points as vocalized by the feet and by the body, which put the markers on the feet in the first place, and create an action plan that allows the person to move from point A to point B on both a physical but also a mental emotional level. Documentation. This is a really big thing, and although I'm not a huge fan of soap notes, this is something that I encourage new budding foot readers to do. Is in my book, I talk a lot about this process of soap notes, reason for the consultation, timeline, feedback, markers 1, 2, 3, outlining the mental and physical meanings, as well as incorporating methods of balancing. All of those things that a foot reader should know how to suggest, how to integrate into a consultation, and using something like a formal documentation form to really like spiff yourself up and make yourself professional. Not just looking at the feet, but actually documenting. This patch of dryness is in horizontal zone 4, vertical zone 4. This means that it's a pure lower digestive issue, pure reproductive issue, but also a pure family and relationships issue. Your body is asking to be released of this particular brand of stress. And the soap notes form really helps us to do that, really allows us from a foot reading standpoint to delve deep with the client on a consultative approach, but also to validate what we're talking about here in terms of the markers that we find. Remote consultations are a biggie. You can see that I have censored this person's face for dramatic effect, but also to let you know that confidentiality is really important. Remote consultations are something that foot readers can do that I personally wasn't aware of. Like coming from a reflexology background, coming from a body worker background, it was hammered into me that if it does not take place in that treatment room, it is not a professional service. But with foot reading, I mean, I get comments and questions and pictures from like literally I wake up in the morning and the first thing that I do when I get to the office is check my inbox, and I have pictures from all over the world of like random feet in my inbox every single morning. And these remote consultations can be done so easily via Skype as a professional service, but also as a fun way to connect with people throughout the world. So once you start to get good at this idea of foot reading, you have to understand that, especially like where I am in the US, in Florida, reflexology and foot reading is not as big here as it is over in the UK, as it is in Ireland, as it is in Australia, where the regulations are a little bit less. Like regulations are really high here in Florida and in the States. So what I enjoy about the foot reading consultations is the ability to bust down physical time-space barriers to allow people to connect with me from all over the world and not need to see them for like a hands-on session. Although hands-on reflexology is a beautiful modality and you should totally go get it if you haven't gotten it already. But foot reading doesn't need that tactile physical touch. in order to assess and to really dig deep into the meanings of the reflexes. We can work just on a visual basis. So achieving certification, like this idea of foot reading as a modality, how do you get certified in it? I mean, is this something that you can pursue? Like, is there a foot reading university? I mean, what is the whole process to become a foot reader? And the answer is simple. There is no certification process. Literally, I've been talking about this throughout the, oh, hey, Bev. I've been talking about this throughout the whole webinar. There is no certification. Reflexology is so fledgling. It's so new, so new. There is no standardized process for getting good at reading the feet. Instead, achieving certification is basically on your own. You know, I had outlined how I first had to learn from Jane, who learned from Imri, but nobody really solidified the content before that. So there is no formal certification process. Instead of actually going through different class points and learning from a mentor, most foot readers are just learning this on their own. They're intuitively picking up, hey, this means this, hey, this means that, without the support structure of a formal class or certification program. And let's be clear, like, a certificate is just a piece of paper at the end of the day. So why would you even want to pursue it? Well, it's not about the piece of paper. What matters as far as foot reading is concerned is that you've seen many feet, have been interpreting for a while, have gotten good at what you do, and your people, your friends, your family, your community, etc., start calling you a foot reader. And this is what happened to me, and what I hope will happen to you if you've been sticking around for this webinar long enough and you've heard me kind of on my soapbox for the last 56 minutes, is that I want you to see as many feet as possible. And I want you to get so good at interpreting that your friends, your family, your clients, your community start turning to you for foot problems. Really great example. I was in the office first thing on Saturday because I'm a hustler, because I'm always seeing people for hands-on and consultations. And I get this phone call about maybe 20 minutes before my first session. And it's a networking partner that I have in one of my groups. And he said, yo, Sam, in those exact words. Not really, but he said, yo, Sam, I woke up this morning and my left toe is literally on fire. It's hot, it's red, it's stiff, I can't bend it, it hurts to walk on it. What the hell is happening? And I said, Steve, give me 2 seconds. Steve, Sean, you know, whatever his name was, which I will not reveal for confidentiality purpose. Why don't you go ahead and Google the meaning of gout for me? And so he Googled the meaning of gout, and he said, wow, that matches totally. So I said, okay, so we've identified that this is potentially a gout flare-up. Have you ever had that before? He said, no. I said, well, here's the mental emotional meaning. And not only did he call me because he knew I would go here. He knew that I would be the perfect person to talk to about this. But I said, gout is a flare-up on the left side when somebody has literally had so much mental and emotional pressure stored inside that they're literally lightning in a bottle at this point, and they have not been able to say what's on their mind, therefore manifesting an inflammatory, painful, and debilitating condition in the left toe. And he, like, if he could drop the phone at that point, he totally would have, because it was an amazing connection of this is the stress that he had been bottling up for the past week that he hadn't let out, and it manifested in a foot condition. And he knew that I would know what it was called, and what it meant. So that's the type of certification stuff that a foot reader should go through, not necessarily a formal standardized program, although I'll talk about that in a second, but being called on by your community as a foot expert and using your skills responsibly kind of for the good of that community. However, it is my pleasure to announce that the online course is coming. Yes, I have been working on it over the past months since the book launch. The foot reading book is now being translated directly into an online course, and I will give you that piece of paper because I know what I had to go through in order to even start getting good at foot reading, and I want to give you those same kind of crucible experiences that will help to shape your foot reading endeavor. And that piece of paper, although it may not be kind of an official stamp of approval of your community, it will help you get more confident as a foot reader in interpreting and decoding the physical, mental, and emotional markers of past and current stress in somebody's life as expressed through the feet. So stay tuned in and join, if you haven't already, the Foot Reading and Reflexology online community, also affectionately known as FRUC, on Facebook for the latest info. That will be coming down the pipeline shortly. We are at 7 p.m., so I wanted to open this up real quick for everybody who's jumping on and has been jumping on. Q&A time. If you have a question, I won't keep you very long, but if you have a question, go ahead, post it in the chat, and I'm going to talk about how to use foot reading as I answer some of these Q&As that you guys pop into the chat with. So you can definitely ask anything as I kind of ramble on and talk about how to use foot reading in everyday life. And for those of you who must not have realized the time difference and are just jumping on now, you can always watch the replay. Okay. So first and foremost, foot reading is extremely effective in a bodywork setting. I don't care what form of bodywork you do. You can be an acupuncturist, you can be a yoga teacher, you can be an essential oil therapist. It really does not matter. If you have the ability in a dark, quiet room to assess somebody's feet while they're in a relaxed state and facilitate a conversation, foot reading is an absolute must. There is no excuse. You must learn it, because it will facilitate that deeper dialogue with clientele on a very intimate level to help you build rapport and also take your practice to that next level. When you were reviewing images online, do you practice a foot reading report? That was from Sandy. When you were reviewing images online, did you practice a foot reading report? The way that I kind of developed the foot reading report process, Sandy, was I would receive pictures and then I would find myself constantly wanting to use 3 specific bullet points in order to describe what I found. And it wasn't until I actually had clients offer to pay me that I started generating formal reports. So it started off as kind of bootleg versions of, I would look at the pictures, I would respond via email with what I found, but then I actually had clients that wanted more information and wanted to pay me money for it. So I started getting serious and typing up an official Word document, copy pasting the photos, circling the markers, incorporating a summary, methods of balancing, all of that jazz. So it's gradually evolved throughout that process. And you know, when we're talking about you know, images online versus a hands-on bodywork setting, that's a really clear contrast. Foot reading doesn't necessarily need to be hands-on. The person doesn't need to be in the room with you. But if you are in a bodywork setting, there really should be some sort of foot reading education that you should have under your belt, because I can tell you, the massage therapists that I train, man, this really changes the way that they look at the body, because they'll be working on the feet first. They'll find the markers, they'll interpret those markers, and then they'll make a beeline exactly for the body, or rather the area that the body has asked for the work through the feet with. So that's fantastic. Reflexology is that hands-on bodywork service, but foot reading can be a standalone service. So some clients will actually ask me to consult independently of hands-on service, and it can be very effective as a standalone consultation. So clients they have the option of, if they're locally coming in to see me for hands-on, but then also, you know, if they're Skyping me in, then obviously they're not physically present. So we spend an hour to 90 minutes discussing their feet, what their body is saying, what kind of preventative maintenance they're using for their body. Is it making sense? Are they listening appropriately? What stressors are currently popping up for them? And all of those things are done remotely as a standalone service. So if any reflexologists are watching in terms of this webinar, I really want to hammer home this idea that you do not need to be hands-on. Foot reading is a standalone service that can be implemented as is. You do not need to put your hands on somebody to know what's happening with them, which is a major misnomer in the field. Remote consultations is a big one. So kind of when we think of progression from hands-on bodywork to standalone consultation service, which could be done maybe one-on-one in like an intimate room, or even alongside bodywork, But then there's this idea of remote consultation. Somebody could Zoom or Skype you in, and literally, I know this sounds kind of weird for somebody who has never experienced this, but trust me, it's a lot less weird than it sounds. They will literally stick their feet up to the camera. I'll jot a couple notes, and then we'll have a 60-minute conversation just off that quick couple minutes of feet in front of the camera. And it's fascinating to them how they can really just give me a glimmer of what's happening in their feet, and I get the entire story. And that's the art and science of foot reading, is seeing the entire person through the lens of the extremity. And that doesn't need to be but a couple visual minutes of assessment, picking your top 3 markers that you want to focus on, and then decoding them based on the foot reading knowledge that you've acquired over your hours of study. Foot reading is super fun in teaching and workshop settings. This is something that I personally love to do. Teaching in workshops is a great way to let the modality shine. The one thing that you need to be careful of, though, is that when you look at somebody's feet, you are truly seeing them. So I've had instances in my workshops where maybe somebody isn't ready to actually divulge some of their stressors. And so it can be kind of a double-edged sword. Like, yes, you're validating the work, but at the same time, you are validating the work so powerfully it may catch people off guard. So teaching in workshops can be a fantastic way to showcase your skills. Maybe if you're already teaching reflexology, adding something like a foot reading module into your work can really help to take the content to the next level. But also workshops, especially centered around self-development, if you wanted to incorporate foot reading, it can really expose all of those internal stressors and really give you a guideline that is body-centric to give you as an access towards creating a customized self-care plan. Bev jumped on and said, would you do a remote consultation after someone sent in a photo to you? Yes, absolutely. In fact, sending in photos is often like the first step of the conversation, and then we'll really delve into the complex stuff in a consultation. So somebody sends in photos, I'll tell them what I think, but then they're always hungry for more after that. And it can be a really nice chain of events because I give them the rundown and then they'll kind of stew on it maybe for a week or two. And they're like, that's really fascinating. Please tell me more. Also, from a learning standpoint, clientele who then become my students, especially my stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads that are homeschooling, that are maybe have multiple children, especially with special needs. It can be such a blessing to have this in your back pocket to say, hey, the kid may be coming down with something, or maybe they've shut down for no reason. Look at the feet, see the changes that have occurred. But also, when somebody is sending in their feet to you, it really gives you that introductory ability to take the conversation to the next level, formulate a consultative approach, even with clients. When you're working with them hands-on, it can be great to get their feet rubbed, but it's a totally different experience to actually sit down with them one-on-one and increase the rapport and deepen the dialogue from that standpoint. So I would always open, that opportunity to do a remote consultation after somebody has sent in a photo. Just because we've talked about the markers doesn't mean that the meaning has landed. So that one-on-one time can really be invaluable for clients who are trying to figure out what the feet are trying to say. And sometimes it doesn't stick the first time. Okay, publishing reports as content on blogs, social media, creating ebooks, and more. And this is the one thing that I really wanted to kind of leave you with, is if you're interested in the reflexology space, if you're interested in foot reading, the best thing that you could possibly do is study through sharing. And I know that sounds, for some of you who haven't heard that concept before, just kind of look at what I do with my stuff. Yep, I'll get to your question in a second, Beth. So look what I do with my stuff. I take the pictures that people send in to me. I use them as teaching experiences, but I'm also growing my craft and my practice at the same time. It can be a fascinating way to validate, but also to increase the professionalism of the work that you're doing. Make a blog post. You'll see some of my blog posts as are case studies on my website. Social media is really big. I'll publish videos on foot reading, and then also ebooks and more can all create content to drive monetary value to your practice, but also to really get you down the rabbit hole faster in terms of learning the skill set. Bev talks about, have you done multiple readings for the same person months apart to see if there is a change? Abso-freaking-lutely. That is a really clever way for foot reading to take place, especially if somebody, so here's another scenario. So I'll have a client come in for a foot reading consultation, either virtually or in person. We'll talk about the markers. They'll have their action items, and then we'll schedule an appointment for about a month later. Yeah. Sometimes a couple weeks, depending on the severity of the issue. But my goal, normally the client has some sort of foot pain or discomfort. That's normally what brings them in to see me. And so we talk about the meaning of the pain, what they can do to reduce it from a physical level, but also in mental, emotional level. And they have their marching orders at the end of the session. But they keep the consultation as an appointment if they have not done what they need to do and the pain has still stuck around. So I give them that caveat. I'm like, look, we've gone over this for an hour. You should know by now, especially if you've been taking notes, kind of what the feet are trying to say, what the message is, and what you need to do to make it better. We'll schedule for a month out. If you don't need the consultation, then jump online and cancel the appointment, or say, hey, Sam, the foot pain went away. You were absolutely right. And I'll ask you if I can use that as a testimony on my website. It's a win-win, you know. But if you're still struggling with that painful area, then the feet and the body are saying you have not listened. You have not heard or done what I've asked you to do. So I'm going to keep the pain around until you do. Awesome. More validation that reflexology does work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So all of that information, very, very valuable. It's about 7:11. I'm going to let you all go. But first, let me kind of jump back on to the video chat to say hi to you personally, for those of you that just can't wait to see my face. There we go. And just as a reminder, so we've been doing this webinar live. The comments have been great. Everybody's been fantastic. But also this replay will be available over the next 24 hours. Thanks, Sandy, in our online school. So please continue to interact with us. Join the online group. Make sure that you stay tuned for future webinars, as well as look for the online course. If you're interested in that, then shoot me a private message. Let me know that you're interested. Perfect. Thank you so much for all the comments, and definitely stay tuned, because this isn't the last webinar that we'll be doing. So it'll just keep getting better and better from here. But for now, have a fantastic night or morning, depending on where you are. And I will talk with y'all soon.